Good evening, everybody. So I just thought it's Mahmood here. I thought we've got a lovely announcement, summer update, as you might call it. We've got no autumn budget coming this year. It's been deferred because obviously there's a bit of a storm, a lot of things brewing up in the economy from coronavirus. Government's announced some updates. That's what I'm going to talk about very briefly before I go home today, about what the announcements are, and I'll share more details with you. My name is Mahmood. Numbers man by training and experience, and my role tonight is to give you a bit of an overview about some of the government announcements that have come out, a bit of a health warning for you. Any details here are predominantly policies, broad brush in nature, but I'm going to drill down as far as we can. If you are self-employed, if you are an employer, if you are a limited company, there is an extension of support for you. Some sectors are more favoured in terms of the tax breaks that are offered, are much more favourable. So I'm going to just give you a potted overview of what's going on. If you're catching up on replay, thank you very much for your company. Type in #replay. I'll jump onto the comments, give you any responses that I can. If you've got any questions that come up in the next 10-15 minutes, which I think is quite palatable at this time of night, then fire them away and I'll do my very best to address and answer those questions. So what's been on the headlines today from Mr. Rishi Sunak? Now, whatever your personal view on the political landscape, if you imagine the scale of the issues and the challenges that we're facing as businesses, to actually come up with a solution, it may not be perfect. There are going to be winners, there are going to be losers, there are going to be people who slip through the cracks. But here, my primary role tonight is just to tell you what's going on as best I read it. Again, more detailed analysis will come out. In all these things, when we announce big headlines, or the Chancellor does, obviously he hasn't consulted me directly, then the details will trickle out, and then we can actually see what's going on. So let's go for our first, what we're going to talk about. So for those of you who are employers, or you are owner managers of your own companies, you may have heard of that phrase called furloughing. Effectively, it's employee hibernation. What it's talking in terms of, if you meet certain criteria, then your company, your employer, can apply for a furlough grant. That officially ends at the end of October. We're now in the month of September, a few days to go, and the furlough grant is cut to 70%. It will be cut to 60% in October, and then before today, announcement about the job support scheme, it was going to be done and buried. So what we've got here, this kicks in from the 1st of November, and it's important to remember, by the way, as we go through these next few slides, this is what's been described as autumn support, winter support, and it's only for the next 6 months. So all these things are subject to review. So what's going to happen by the time we get to, what's that going to be? October, end of March, there may be something else coming into its place, or it may be stopping. So we're really only looking ahead for the next 6 months based on today's announcements. So the job support scheme largely is replacing the furlough scheme, which stopped officially at the end of October. And as a heads up on that, by the way, if you are in the furlough scheme, then you've got to make your claim by the end of November. If you miss that November deadline, unfortunately, you don't get anything at all. So from the 1st of November, the key interesting thing here is pretty much as before, as has been happening in October, November, the haircut, if you want to call that, the pain, the payment of somebody's salaries, the burden is shared 3 ways. The employer shares some of the burden, the employee shares some of the burden, and the government shares some of the burden. And here's how it will work. Now, first of all, that 3-way sharing of financial burden for paying an employee's salary, the whole primary aim behind this measure is to try and maintain a workforce. Companies do not have to go forward with a redundancy program. That's always a very difficult and challenging time for any company to go through that process. And it goes as follows. Now, initially, if you have not accessed the furlough scheme before, you've not been eligible, that's fine. The clock is reset. You've got to have been on a payroll scheme, an operating one, and done what they call an RTI claim. So submitted something to HMRC by the 23rd of September. So pretty much, even if you've not claimed before, because you've not had a payroll scheme when you were supposed to, but you've actually got one now, then tick, you are potentially eligible to make the claim. Employers, if you're effectively what's called as SME business, there's no financial assessment, by the way. So if you just are an SME employer, typically that's 250 employees or less, turnover 50 million euros. So that's going to cover about 99% of the business population, certainly in the UK, then you qualify. If you're a larger business beyond that, by the way, then you have to have some degree of financial assessment to see if your turnover has been affected by coronavirus. So employer, payroll scheme, and HMRC have got to know that you're in existence, or you sent them on what's called an electronic return by 23rd of September. If you've got employees and they're with you, then obviously you are eligible. Now, the criteria as follows. The employee has got to work at least 1/3 of their normal hours. And I'm going to go through some numbers with you in a moment. And these numbers, by the way, are taken straight out of the policy document that HMRC published when they published this guidance today. So the employee must work at least 1/3 of their normal contracted hours. If they work below that, then they're not eligible and you won't be able to make a job support scheme claim. Usual thing in all these, devil in the detail, you will be asked to check and verify eligibility when the portal comes live. So again, just be very careful when you make that claim that you tick the boxes on all the criteria. Now here's how it works. Now the example of the revenue use is an employee who earns a £350 a week for a 5-day week. The employee works 40% of that time. So think of it like part-time work below your normal contracted hours. Now the 40% of the time they are working for during the course of that week, you as the employer must pay them the normal contracted pay. So obviously make sure it's in line with whatever their contract of employment is. Make sure it's obviously above minimum wage or at least equal to the living wage. So for what you work as an employee, you must be receiving the full pay entitlement for the hours worked. Now, what we've got then, out of the £350 a week wage packet, the employee has got £140. 2 days work, £70 a day, 140, that's fine. The other £210, if you've worked that minimum 33% or 1/3 of your time, the employee, or employer I should say, will now have to contribute 2/3 of that. So the £210 that the employee hasn't received, the employer will pay £140 of that. So now the employee has got a take-home pay packet of £280 there. The other 20%, the shortfall, is the pain that the employee will have to bear. And again, remember, you can't just impose it on an employee. It's got to be universally agreed with that employee. If I take furloughing as a good example that we've done with all of our clients and others that we've advised, that doesn't tend to be an issue, but you've got to go through the normal process and protocol of getting it agreed, getting it in writing. So all those due diligence things, please make sure you tick those boxes. Otherwise, you run the risk of the claim being clawed back by HMRC. So 350 quid a week, £140 will be for the 40% of the time they've spent. Employer gives 2/3. Now the government will step in and will contribute effectively 20%. So in other words, the £70 you can claim for a grant the government will provide. Now remember, you as the employer, you have the option of fully paying that person's wage bill, or you just go down to the lower level. That's your choice in agreement with the employee. If you don't, the £70 contribution you get from HMRC, i.e. through the government, you use as a grant to offset those payroll costs. So that's the job support scheme. It expires at the end of March. Again, watch this space to see what happens beyond that. And again, watch out for details. By all means, please, if you want to keep up to date, want to know what's going on, drop me a comment box here. Comment in the box. I'll add you to our mailing list here where we update clients and people who aren't even clients of ours with what's going on in this great big bad world in terms of finance and numbers. So that's the first of all, that's the job support scheme. Again, think of it like the revised furlough scheme Mark II. And let's click that here. I'm going to say hello to an old client and friend of mine. Good evening, Mr. Nanda. Thank you very much for that that sort of endorsement, thumbs up. Obviously, if you want to put your question in, Jay, hashtag replay, and I'm going to answer that in due course. So let's take Jay off the comments box. I can actually do it, that is. As you can see, I'm a technology wizard here. Jay's probably laughing at me, thinking, my gosh, is he actually going to be able to take it off? How do I remove these comments? Just talk amongst yourselves. Oh, there, I've just discovered it here. So that's the job support scheme. Now, the good thing about today's announcement, again, it wasn't anticipated. We are in a bit of a tricky hair shirt, sort of bum clenching time at the moment. We're now going to look at the self-employed grant. Now, as a principle, by the way, the self-employed grant is there largely to make it comparable with the job support scheme. Normal things, eligibility. So if you are self-employed, there's a bit of a misnomer here. When we use the word self-employed and I'm talking to businesses as just a straightforward conversation, I have that meaning in normal conversation is that you are your own boss. So you're in charge of your own business, whether that business is a limited company or a sole trader, a solopreneur. In the context of this grant, though, self-employed means that you are an individual. You do not operate through a company, or you don't have limited or PLC at the end of your name. You're a freelancer, solopreneur, whatever term ticks the boxes. But the key thing is when you complete a personal tax return, you complete the orange section, the self-employed pages. That's what we mean here. Normal eligibility, just a quick reminder, you've got to have at least 50% of your overall income for the year has got to be from self-employment, can't be over 50K. You've got to be registered self-employed by 18/2019. So remember, all those conditions that you had before for the self-employed grant still apply for this self-employed grant phase. Well, effectively phase 3, because we had a grant early July. Up to that, we had the second one, which effectively expires next month, and then we've got self-employed grant phase 3. Now, largely, it's broadly in line with the job support scheme, and it says as follows. So having ticked the boxes for all the eligibility, and if you're thinking, I'm not quite sure what the eligibility was for Mood, drop a comment in the box and I'll send you forward some details, brackets, links to blogs that we've published on this before. Now, if you have not applied for the self-employed grant before, by the way, doesn't matter, you can still apply for this one. Typical eligibility: has your business been affected adversely by COVID-19? And that covers things which we talked about on previous broadcasts before, like maybe a drop in sales line, extra costs because of PPE, contracts being cancelled. And for me, I look at it as the situation that says, if this craziness hadn't happened in our world, where would your business be? If you think it's because of coronavirus, COVID-19, it's been adversely affected, you tick that box. Broadly, you get it paid as one lump sum. Now, they haven't formally announced the numbers for the second grant, so this grant will cover the 1st of November, effectively up until the end of, if I can do the numbers in my head, to the end of, where are we, November, December, January, end of January, the next grant will kick in thereafter. Roughly, it's going to be capped at about £1,875 on the grant, but crudely, it's about 20% of your average monthly profits for a 3-month period. Like all these things on the job support grant, as well as this one, it's taxable. It's not a loan, it's a grant, so it forms part of your income. But the good thing is you won't have anything to worry about as far as tax is concerned until January 2022. So for me, don't get fixated by this. If you haven't applied for the earlier grants, it makes no odds. And if you haven't applied for the second grant, by the way, get your act together, check it out, and make sure you do apply for it if you're eligible. I'm just going to say hello to an associate of mine, Sarah. Good evening to you. Hope you're well. That's very kind of you, Sarah, to that little thumbs up endorsement here. So I'll take that. So I hope life is good with you. So we've talked about the two big ones. We've talked about the job support scheme. We've talked about the furlough grant, old, new style. We've also talked about the self-employed grant. And now we've got a few other headlines just to share with you. So let me just do my magic. These are the other ones here. Now, so far, all the detail that's been published have been largely policy documents. So there's no actual detail, and you must keep a careful eye on that. They haven't opened up portals. They haven't actually said this is how you claim. If it's in line with anything else, by the way, agents, your accountant can help you with the job support scheme, and I think you probably need some help to go through the guidance notes. Self-employed grant is largely going to be down to the individual. Accountants or agents or friends cannot apply for the self-employed grant on your behalf. By all means, talk to them. So we certainly support and help our clients, tell them what they've got to do. HMRC have got all the numbers, and watch out for shysters, by the way. There are a lot of predatory people out there who will pretend they're from HMRC, say if you pay us this money or do X, Y, and Z, claim. Ignore that completely. If in doubt, always press delete or talk to somebody who knows what's going on. Your agents, accountants cannot do the claim for you, but they can certainly advise you what happens. Watch this space. The portal is not yet open for the grant. Now, here's some other bits and bobs that's worth knowing about. Two things on VAT. Number one, there was a 5% rate on VAT on food and non-alcoholic drinks in the hospitality sector. So typically restaurants, bars, cafes, if you're selling food and non-alcoholic drinks, the normal rate would be typically 20%. It was cut to 5%. It was originally planned to phase it out around about 12th, 13th of January of next year. That's now been extended to the 31st of March 2021. So what that means, you've got two choices. You either pass that reduction to your clients, your customers, to encourage some stimulus coming in, or you keep that for yourself. You keep your prices the same. It's entirely up to you, but the government will only expect a 5% tax that. So that's extended till 31st of March. So that's a bit good news. Again, the name of the game is cash flow. So therefore, if you've got less VAT to pay over, you're operating as a tax collector, that's got to be a positive thing to take on board. Also, the VAT deferral, so if you had VAT bills coming up to June 2020, you were allowed to delay them. They were automatically delayed until next year. The government have now said, when it comes to VAT, if you've got a deferment of VAT, so you've decided you haven't got the cash to pay your VAT bill, then what you are allowed to do, you can repay back your VAT arrears over 11 instalments. And the good news is it's interest free as well. Now, I'm going to give you a couple of tips at the end, by the way, always a heads up what you need to manage this situation. So if you were slightly worried, anxious about paying a VAT bill of one that you've delayed, you've got the option of actually delaying that and spreading that over 11 interest-free instalments. It's going to be good news. And last thing on the loans, the bounce back loan scheme, minimum 2,000, maximum 50,000. You base it on turnover up to December 2019. Now, if you haven't claimed the bounce back loan, I'm not normally somebody who encourages people to borrow money for a number of reasons for debt. There are good times when you should do that. For me, it's largely a no-brainer. If you meet the eligibility criteria, make the application. The loan scheme hasn't finished yet. They are also going to be extending it, by the way, beyond November, which is good news. But for me, it's a cash reserve that you need to put to one side just in case you might need it. If you don't need it, pay it back. But the interest rate at 2.5% is probably the best deal you're going to get pretty much anywhere. Now, the repayment period is 6 years. So you borrow the money, you don't repay back anything within 12 months. You can then pay it back after 12 months. If you decide you want to hang on to it and you repay it over a 6-year period, that loan repayment period has now been extended to 10 years. So you've got much longer to spread the repayments. So again, that reduces some of that cash pressure if you factor it in. Also, what we call the support loan, the coronavirus support loan, again, the repayment on that has been extended to 10 years as well. Last point really is in terms of time to pay. If you're a self-assessment taxpayer, the government are factoring in, again, the details haven't been precisely announced here, but deadlines for tax are due January 2021. You are going to have extra time to pay those tax. So it's a combination of some grants, some loans, some deferral. Now, here's my headline tip, everyone, before I wrap up and let you get on with the rest of your evening. Absolutely critical. Okay, coronavirus might have focused the attention, but you should do this in any situation. So any business that does not grab its cash flow by the scruff of the neck and deal with it adequately is, frankly, in my opinion, doing something quite reckless. Cash flow is the thing that will keep your business operating, keep it surviving, enable it to grow. Once the cash runs out, say goodnight, close the lights on your way out. So I would absolutely recommend that you do a cash flow forecast now. If you're feeling slightly anxious, slightly nervous and thinking, my gosh, what's going to happen? Do a cash flow, and I promise you, if you do it correctly, if you do it adequately, you look ahead, then you will find your level of anxiety will diminish. You're more in control of what's going on in your business. Watch out, there's going to be some updates coming through. We're going to do probably a webinar or something on this very topic, but watch this space. If you want to find out a bit more about cash flows, check out our site. We've got loads of freebie stuff, blog articles, podcasts on the issue. But failing that, everybody, have a fantastic evening. I shall probably be invading your airwaves again on Saturday. Any questions, pop them into the chat box, comments box, #replay. Failing that, I hope you all have a brilliant evening and try to remain sanguine. I know it's very easy to say, difficult to actually do. Try not to let anxiety overrun and actually sort of focus on your mindset there as well. So it's a good night for me, and I wish you all well.